The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus told his disciples, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what would it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of the Father, and then he will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. The Gospel inspired by God. It's a great question, Marty. You're not allowed to start the game before the whistle goes, Marty. Okay, no, it's a great question, because the truth is, you have to know how to unpack it. You know, the Bible, and particularly Jesus' teaching, is like a paradox wrapped in a dilemma on the horns of a kind of a conundrum. So,
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, right.
I was going to say, repeat that.
You have to really learn how to unpack stuff, because Jesus speaks in paradoxes constantly. All great wisdom is elucidated in paradoxes. Because as soon as you say anything about life, there's a situation in which the exact opposite is the case. I keep, telling you about, Proverbs particularly. Proverbs are the distillation of the wisdom of any culture. If you want to go to the wisdom of any culture, go to their stories first, because their stories tell you their wisdom. But if you want a kind of a pithy articulation of a story, go to a proverb. And proverbs always contradict each other, because there will be instances in which the exact opposite is the case. So in English we say, for instance, he who hesitates is lost. But we also say, look before you leap. So, in some instances, if you hesitate, you've lost the game. Other situations, if you rush blindly into stuff, you make terrible mistakes. In Irish we say, ní lein tín tán mar de hing tán féin. There's no fireside like your own fireside. Home is always special. But we also say, Bíon blas ar chud an chórsan. There's a special taste to the neighbour's food. And so, when you're a little kid, you think what you got in the neighbour's house is much better than what you got in your own. So proverbs always contradict each other, because truth is paradoxical in its very nature. And so when we say words inspired by God, it's, you have to be inspired by God in order to understand what the words mean. Yeah? It's not that God reveals stuff in just black and white, where it should be obvious to everybody listening to it that this is the meaning of it. But that if you're serious about it, you have to start digging deeply into it. And then they're inspired by God. It's not the articulation that's inspired, it's the interpretation that's inspired. It's the listener.
It's the Old Testament.
It's true of the Old Testament as well. We have to differentiate between, when you read the Old Testament, it's not a book, it's a library of books. Depending on whether or not you're using the Catholic version of the Old Testament or the Protestant version of the Old Testament, there's either 73 books totally in the whole thing, or there are 66 books. So there's either 39 books in the Old Testament or 46. In the Catholic version of the Old Testament, there's 46 books. In the Protestant version, there's 39 books. And this is a compendium of totally different kinds of literature. There's history there, there's proverb there, there's kind of liturgical texts there are letters there, there's conundrums, literally, what's the word I'm looking for in English? Ketendawili, riddles, literally riddles. This stuff is put as riddles. And so it's like, if you crack open the morning newspaper, unconsciously you don't realize what you're doing, but you're reading every section with a totally different mindset. You're not reading the sports section with the same mindset that you're reading the financial section, or the kind of the comic section, or the gardening section. As you move from section to section, you're shifting your mindset, but you're doing it unconsciously. You're not aware you're doing it. So you have to have the same idea. When you read the Old Testament, am I reading a historical book here? Am I reading a fictional account? Am I reading some kind of a riddle here? Am I reading a letter here? Is this a liturgical text I'm reading? So you have to read you with totally different mindsets. So it's the person that's listening to the word that's where the revelation is, not so much in the articulation, but in the revelation. If people know what they're doing, you can take a very simple text and plumb it for a treasure. If they don't know what they're doing, you can take a very rich text and it's not going to make any sense to them. I talked last week about the difference between receiving communion and knowing what you're doing and just going up with your hands in your pockets, chewing gum and getting a piece of bread into your mouth. So you would think that each person is having the same experience, that they're having an encounter with Jesus. They're not. The kid that's coming up with chewing gum in his mouth is just receiving a piece of bread. The woman that's coming up with extraordinary devotion, she's having an encounter with Jesus right there. So it's the mindset of the recipient that's creating the sacrament. And the same thing is true of the scriptures. It is the mindset of the person listening to the word or reading it for themselves that's creating the revelation. It's not the kind of the text itself that's revealed. It's the articulation, it's the reception, it's the interpretation. That's where the truth lies. Exactly. There's a lot more. There's as much in it as you want. If you know how to look, it doesn't matter where you look, you'll find everything. If you don't know how to look, it doesn't matter where you look, you're not going to find anything. So it's not that the stuff is hidden and those to if you happen upon it, you'll get it. It's the mindset with which you make the search. That's what determines whether or not you're going to have a divine encounter with the text or you're just going to read a piece of ridiculous literature. Yeah. So I totally get it, because the first reading today from Nahum is a disaster, unless you understand what the background is. This is a historical text that comes from the year about 740 BCE, when the great empire of the time was the Assyrian Empire. And it was the headquarters or the capital city of the Assyrian Empire is a town called Nineveh. So you heard mentioning Nineveh. And Nineveh was threatening the integrity of Israel at the time, the 12 tribes of Israel. And in fact, in 721 BC, about 20 years after this text was written, they invaded and they destroyed the land of Israel. They deported 10 of the 12 tribes, and these 10 tribes are never heard of again. So this is what Nahum was talking about, and he was saying to Nineveh, I guarantee you, your time will come as well. Now you're coming in with chariots and horses and you're devastating, there's bodies piled up all over the place, but I guarantee you, you'll have your day as well. And indeed they did. So they conquered Israel in 721 BC, and then the Babylonians came, the next big empire, and they conquered Assyria and destroyed Assyria. And then of course the Persians came and they destroyed Babylon. And then the Greeks came and they destroyed the Persians. And then the Romans came and they destroyed the Greeks. And so it's just one empire falling after the other. So that's the historical background to it today. So the real deep message is, if you engage in warfare and you think that, life is about conquering people, your day will come as well. Every empire will have its, a terminus period. So it sounds like it's real doom and gloom, but what it's saying is, unless you trust in God, if you understand that life is about love, then as long as you make war, you'll be the victim of war at some stage. Every culture that's created an empire has fallen by the sword, by some new empire. So that's the kind of the backstory to it. So it's about, it's about depending on the love of God. That's the invitation there. Okay, brilliant. So that's exactly, it's interesting that these two texts are put together today by the Church in its wisdom. The text from Jesus, when he's talking about, carrying your cross. But this is a typical text in which, the Christian churches have a real penchant for twisting the words of Jesus into real negative kind of connotations. So they have Jesus saying today, unless you take up your cross every day and follow me, you're not worthy to be a disciple. Now, they've twisted this so that the expectation is that if you're a follower of Jesus, life should be a drudgery, it should be about pain, it should be about suffering, and indeed the Christian churches went out of their way to create an environment in which this was people's real experience of life. Through the legislation they enacted and the fact of, sending, crusades and conquistadors across the world, they created a situation in which this actually was people's experiences. Is that what Jesus had in mind when he said, if you want to be my followers, you've got to take up your cross daily and follow me? It was 180 degrees out from that. Because the same Jesus that said that also said, I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. It was the same Jesus who said it, if you ask the Father for anything in my name, I will grant it to you. So do you think people are praying for, please give me suffering, please give me drudgery, please give me pain? They're not. So we've totally misunderstood. So it's the mindset that's interpreting these statements, that's turning this into kind of, doom and gloom and watch over your shoulder. So what does this text mean? The cross for me is the following. The cross is not an instrument of torture. The cross for me, the vertical arm of the cross, is the connection between the immanent and the transcendent, between the secular and the sacred, between the mundane and the mystical. It's the realization that every single one of us is actually a soul on safari on planet Earth. We have to constantly maintain that connection to source. That's the vertical arm of the cross. And the horizontal arm of the cross is the realization of the brotherhood and the sisterhood of all created beings. We're all on the same level. We're all connected to each other. And the intersection point between the vertical and the horizontal is the individual soul. We experience life as an intersection point between how God meets her creation and how creation meets their brothers and sisters. So carrying your cross is not an instrument of torture that you're kind of going to scream in agony. It's the realization that who you really, really are is a bite-sized piece of God who are connecting the sacred and the secular and connecting the brotherhood and the sisterhood of all living beings. So when he says something that he goes on, then it says, the Son of Man is going to come back surrounded by his angels and there's going to be a day of reckoning. And we think that the last time is Christ coming back and there's going to be doom and gloom and judgment of all kinds. There's nothing got to do with that. This is not a parable about God's relationship to us. It's a parable of the soul's relationship to the ego. So who is the Son of Man who comes back in his glory surrounded by the angels? It is not Jesus Christ coming back at the end time. It has nothing got to do with Jesus Christ coming back at the end time. It's your self-realization. You are the Son of Man. When you come into the realization of who you really are, that you're a bite-sized piece of God. You are the Son of Man, or the daughter of man. And you're surrounded by the angels because you've self-realized, you're enlightened. You live at the same level as these beings who constantly witness the face of God. So it's not Jesus coming back with a whole host of angels to kind of visit punishment on us. So it's saying your life will determine whether or not, you get to have that experience. So when he says, for instance, to his audience, there are some people, standing here today who will not see death until the Son of Man comes back. Every single one of them died. A lot of them died, were killed. Only John kind of survived to be a centenarian, and John died as well. And 2,000 years later, there have been billions of people who have died who've been followers of Jesus. So what does this statement mean? There are some standing here today who will not see death before the Son of Man comes back. Christ was saying, there are some of you here today who are going to really, really, really get it. That you're as much a child of God as I'm a child of God. And when you get that, you'll never see death. Because you realize that the body is just a spacesuit that you need for an incarnational experience. But that is not who you are. Who you are, you're a soul. You're an eternal bite-sized piece of God. So you will never die. When you get that realization, there is no death. And so there are people listening to Jesus for whom that was true. They never died. Not that they didn't shuffle off their mortal coils, but because they had self-realized, they knew who they were, so death was not a possibility. And the same thing is true of our little group here this morning. There are some sitting here today who will never see death. Those who realize who they really, really are, they'll shuffle off their mortal coils, but they will never see death because they realize that they're eternal beings. But the church twists this to kind of inspire fear, because when you make people fearful, you can lick them into shape and you can control them. And I think very often, these people themselves, the leaders, the clerical leaders, very often were not very advanced people, spiritually not very advanced. They were in positions of secular power, but they had no clue who Jesus was and what his real message was about. The spirit is to the soul as Shakespeare is to Hamlet. So Hamlet is a particular work of this genius called Shakespeare. He also wrote a whole bunch of other plays, and he wrote sonnets of various kinds, and there was a lot of other stuff, that he thought about that he never wrote about. So Hamlet is a particular articulation of the genius called Shakespeare. So a soul is a particular articulation of spirit. Spirit, in some senses, is the creative aspect of the divine. And so everything that comes from spirit, is divine. It's a bite-sized piece of God. But there's a lot more to spirit than creation. There's a lot to spirit that doesn't manifest itself as creation. Just like you have, very, very often, you have thoughts that you don't articulate, you don't put into words. When you're musing at the kitchen sink and you're washing dishes or whatever, there's a whole bunch of stuff going through your mind that you're never going to speak. Yeah, because there's too much stuff there. If you were to speak everything that came into your mind, you'd be speaking 24/7. And so the same thing is true of spirit. There's a whole lot of power, possibility, potential in spirit that never gets articulated. So spirit is the soul, as the kind of the playwright is to the particular drama.
So the soul is a small part of
Bite-sized piece of God. That's why I keep saying a bite-sized piece of spirit or God.
spirit.
Yeah, and spirit is the kind of the creative aspect of the divine. So if you think of like Father, Son, and Spirit, you know, in the Christian Trinity, for me what it means is that God the Father represents the transcendent source about which we can say nothing. The Spirit represents the creative aspect of that source that brings things into being, and the Son represents the created, that which is articulated or manifested. And so every single one of us, you know, is a Jesus Christ. We're a manifestation of that extraordinary ability of Spirit. If you stay with it long enough, you have to marinate in it. You have to marinate in it. Literally. Yeah, you have to marinate in it until finally it seeps in just from the surface, you know, of the piece right into the core of it, you know. And in some sense, it doesn't matter when we get it. God is not interested in time. Time is a total human artifact. And so as far as we're concerned, it's very important whether I got it yesterday or I won't get it for another week. As far as God is concerned, there is only the eternal now. So it's not so important, you know, when you get it, but that you get it. Don't put a timeline in it. Keep marinating in it. St. John said it very powerfully in one of his letters. He said, how can you say you love God whom you've never met if you don't love your brother and sister with whom you daily come into contact? And so the greatest indication that you're loving God is the fact that you're living compassionately with others. It's the greatest proof of it. Yeah. There are a lot of pseudo saints out there doing a lot of, you know, spiritual disciplines, you know, but it's the ego. It's an ego journey. It's not got to with the soul's journey. So they appear to be very, very holy people, but they're not, because they're not acting in compassionate ways to their brothers and sisters. That's the ultimate test. Right, and that's the classic, you know, for somebody who's serious about the journey, that's the classic, what's called the dark night of the soul. So typically the spiritual journey is going to go through 4 phases. The first phase is when you first, you know, fall in love with God. And you're saying, oh my God, how could I have missed this all my life, at whatever age it can. And it feels really, really great. The second stage is then you dedicate your life to God. You start all kinds of spiritual practices. You go to Mass every day, you say the Rosary, you know, go to pilgrimage to Rome, or, you know, meditate, or, you know, whatever it is. And you feel really, really good about stuff. This feels really, really good. And then the dark night of the soul comes. You're doing all the same things you were doing during the second phase, but it is dry and desiccated, and you can't believe it. This is all there is to it. You know, because really it should be called the dark night of the ego. It's not the dark night of the soul. It's not the soul that's having this problem, it's the ego. Because the ego wants to really, really feel good about any enterprise, and now it doesn't feel good anymore. So at this stage, the ego wants to give up. You know, so this is the test for the ego. Have I been doing this, you know, to please myself, or have I been doing this to please God? And when you break through that phase, and it can last for years in some instances, stage 4 is, it's a real love affair with God. The ego is out of the equation completely, and it's the soul in relationship to God. Because when you go back to, Buddhists have a great statement. They say, before enlightenment, you finish it for me? Before enlightenment, you split wood and you carry water.
Oh, yeah.
After enlightenment, you split wood and you carry water. Your life doesn't change each time. You're doing the same things you were doing.
My
Yeah.
yoga teacher used to say, enlightenment and then laundry.
Oh yeah, okay, brilliant. Yeah, you're doing exactly the same stuff, but you're doing it in a totally different space. This is the greatness of somebody like the little flower, Therese of Lisieux, who died at age like 23 or 24. You know, in the kitchen, you know, peeling spuds. That was her lifetime. But she did it from a space where that was, you know, like sacramental in its ramifications. So you do exactly the same things you did before as after, but there's a different you doing it. It's the soul engaging rather than the ego. So it's like any relationship. Every relationship is really hard work. You know, every relationship goes through 4 stages as well. There's the first stage, I'm talking about romantic relationships particularly. You know, the first one is you fall in love and you think the sun and the moon and the stars shine out of your beloved. You know, life is great. And then the second phase is called intimacy. We share our bodies, our dreams, our hopes, our fears, our living arrangements, and this is really easy to be in. The third stage always comes, and it's called disillusionment, yeah, which sounds really bad, but disillusion means the shattering of the illusion. I haven't really been in love with you. I've been in love with a fantasy or an idealized version of whom I want you to be, and now you're not showing up like that anymore because you can only wear a persona for a certain amount of time, and that's when relationships break down. But our breakthrough. And if they break through, you get to stage 4, which is, I accept you completely who you are. There are things about you that annoy me, and there are things about you that I love you, but I'm accepting the whole package, and we're going to grow old together. You know, but it's going to be a lot of hard work. You're going to have to show up at times when you're cranky. You're going to have to show up times when you're tired. You're going to have to show up times, you know, when you want to watch the football game, and I want to go to the movies with you, or whatever. So that's what all relationships, including the relationship with God, is going to go through that phase. And it's the disciplined commitment to the relationship during the tough times that allows finally the soul to kind of get liberated. It's not, it's a dream. It's a dream reality. I'm serious.
I don't tell you that now.
Yeah.
She was just getting settled in.
Yeah, she's just beginning to get.
I keep saying to you that life is a dream that the ego is having. And the ego is a dream that the soul is having, and the soul is a dream that spirit is having, and spirit is a dream that source is having. There are nested dreams. I'm not saying a dream is not real. A dream is real, but there are different orders of reality, different kinds of stages of reality. And this one that we call life is the densest level of reality. It is real, but it is a dream. It's the deepest, kind of, you know, most enervating level of dreaming. When you get to the level of the soul, the dream is much more liberating. You get to the level of spirit, it is more liberating still. You get to the level of source, and it is all in all. But we're in dreams, and all the great spiritual teachers say that. You know, but if you've ever had the experience of dreaming lucidly at night, where in the middle of a dream you realize, oh my God, I'm dreaming. When that happens to you, you've got 3 choices. If you don't like what's happening to you in the dream, you can wake yourself up. If you realize this is a dream, and nothing bad can happen to me, since it's only a dream, so let's see what happens, and you let the dream continue. Or the third possibility is you say, I'm dreaming, I know I'm dreaming, it's my dream, and I'm going to make it go in a direction I want it to go. So you take control of the dream and you push it in a particular direction. When you realize that in the dream state, you can begin applying that in the waking state. This too is a lucid dream. And once you realize that, you've got the same 3 choices. You can opt out. You can realize that ultimately nothing bad can happen to you, even if physical death is not a problem. And you say, okay, let's see what life offers to me. Or you can say, this is my dream, this is my incarnation, I volunteered for it, and I'm going to take control of it and make sure it accomplishes that for which my soul set out to do. I'm going to learn how to love, you know, in the situation. You get the very same 3 choices. So it's a question of just bringing lucidity into every level of the dream. I read sometimes that the great gurus or the great masters or mistresses were able to maintain lucidity at every stage of the journey. They were lucid during the waking stage. In their dreams they could be lucid, and even when they were not dreaming, when there was contentless consciousness, that part of the night when you're not dreaming, it seems to be there's no you there, that the great masters can be conscious even then of consciousness itself. There's no content to it. It's contentless consciousness, but there is an awareness there of that reality. It's not either or, it's both and. It's not either or, it's always both and.
Both and.
If contemplation doesn't lead to action, it's simply narcissistic navel gazing.
Okay.
If there's action which isn't driven by contemplation, you know, it's the ego trying to accomplish a purpose. So it's the combination between the two.